Welcome to this evening's Norwich Science Festival at Home panel discussion on clinical trials. We'll just give people a few more seconds to arrive and then we'll get started. While you wait, please visit menti.com and answer this question to help us assess the impact of this event. Just enter the code 6789518 and answer the question that appears on your screen. We'll see you in just a few minutes. Good evening, everyone. My name's Rachel and I work in the events team at UEA. Thank you for joining us for this Norwich Science Festival at Home event. I'll shortly introduce our chairperson, Andrew Stronach, who will introduce us to the rest of the panel, but first a bit of housekeeping. After they've introduced themselves, our panel will be taking your questions, which you can post in the YouTube live chat. I hope we'll get to as many questions as possible before we finish at 8 p.m. Please remember that all viewers will be able to see any comments you post in the live chat. Once this event has ended, please do tell us what you thought by filling out our survey with the chance of winning a John Lewis voucher. The survey can be accessed via the Norwich Science Festival website or using the link on the slide at the end of this event. To help secure the future of Norwich Science Festival, please consider making a donation by visiting norwichsciencefestival.co.uk/donate. Enjoy the event and please do join the discussion. I'll now hand over to Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our panel discussion on the vital role of clinical trials. I will now try and share our screen. Yeah, I don't think I can do that at the moment. Let's just, there we go. Great. Yeah, good evening, everybody. I'll just quickly introduce our panel tonight. We're joined by Carl Philpott from the Norwich Medical School and James Paget University Hospital, Rachel Stanley from the Biorepository at the Norfolk and Norwich University Hospital, Polly Ashford from UEA's Clinical Trials Unit, Matt Hammond from UEA's Clinical Trial Unit, myself, Nancy Teng from Quadrant Bioscience, and Sarah Phillips from Quadrant Bioscience, and Tony Jackson, who is a member of the public and somebody who's been involved in clinical trials. And they'll each tell you a bit about what they do, why they do it, and how they do it. We've asked you to we've posed some questions, and we're really quite interested to see what you come up with. So, we know you've got lots of questions for us, but this was about us just gauging your views. We'll try and have a quick look and see what the results were. Right. Okay. It doesn't look like that's come through. So we'll crack on with the rest of the presentation. I'm head of external relations at Quadrum, and for those of you who've never heard of Quadrum, we're a relatively new kid on the block in the Norwich Research Park. We are fairly unique. We opened, we are unique. We opened in 2018 in a beautiful new building, which is next to Bob Champion Building and the Norfolk and Norwich University Hospital. And what's unique about Quadrum is it brings together laboratory scientists from Quadrum Institute Bioscience, clinicians from the NNN, researchers from UEA, all within one building where we can bring together all of those skills and all that expertise and the patient information, data and samples, and really do some exciting science with it. So that's the Quadram Institute. And next door to us is the NRP Biorepository. At the bottom of my slide, you'll see the clinical research facility. So if you're taking part in a clinical trial with Quadram or the hospital, there's every chance that you'll be visiting that. And we'll talk more about that through the discussion. Clinical trials, what are they? It's a type of research that tests new clinical tests or treatments and evaluates them. You know, are they safe? Do they work? How can they be improved? So they're very, very carefully designed things. I think clinical trials is a term that we've probably all vaguely been aware of as members of the public, but over the past 6 months, for obvious reasons, that phrase, clinical trials, has been everywhere. One of the things you can see from this slide is that normally clinical trials evolve very slowly, very carefully. They take years to set up, they take years to run, and that's quite a slow process. I mean, one of the things I should mention is that I am a trial participant at the moment in a COVID-19 vaccine trial, and where you see those timescales, they are much, much shorter than you see on that slide. And that's because we've got the infrastructure in this country to be able to scale up very quickly. That's been done quite successfully and is really quite exciting for all of us. On the subject of COVID-19, I think thank you to everybody who submitted questions already. We've had a few, and lots of them do ask about COVID-19. I just want to remind you all that there is a session, the Science Festival is running tomorrow evening with colleagues from across the research park that's looking at COVID-19. So if you do want to find out more about that, you can check that out tomorrow evening. Finally, I'm also a trial participant in a completely different kind of study. I am conscious that Great British Bake Off is on after this, so inevitably I've given you a study that involves eating bread. So it's a very different kettle of fish to a vaccine trial. And what we've done with the John Innes is develop a type of wheat that's got a more resistant starch, and we're really interested in seeing how that works in human beings. How does it respond? How does it taste? And does it have the desired effect we might want? So that's the REST study. I would just ask you to note that, like some of our studies, recruitment for that one is on hold at the moment because of the pandemic, but we'll get started on it again soon. Now, I'd like to hand over to Sarah, if she'd like to sort of take us through parallel and motion.
Thanks, Andrew. So I work at the same institute as Andrew. The Quadram Institute. So I fall under Dr. Lindsay Hall's laboratory. And I'm responsible for the oversight of 2 large longitudinal studies, which are based on human studies. So this first one is called the Pearl study. What it's looking at is how the gut microbiome affects health during pregnancy and early life. We ask participants to join during pregnancy and give us a few clinical samples. So that would be urine samples, stool samples, and vaginal swabs and skin swabs. We also try and collect some data, so questions from them to compare to their clinical samples. And we follow them all the way through pregnancy. And then once they've given birth, we ask them to be a part of the study as well as their infants up until their babies are 2 years old. The questions that we sort of want to answer from this study are: how do microbes change during pregnancy, and what factors would influence both health and the microbiome communities themselves? And as I said earlier, this one is led by Dr. Lindsay Hall. Andrew, if you could skip onto the next slide for me, thank you. So this next study is led by Professor Simon Carding, who is also part of the Quadram Institute. This study is called the Motion Study, and we're again looking at the gut microbiome, but instead of early life, we're going to the other side of things. This is to do with older aged people, so 60 plus, and looking at cognitive decline during old age and how that can be linked to the gut microbiome. There's actually a small typo there. It should be 360 participants in total who are going to be a part of this study. They have to be healthy participants to begin with, and they'll be recruited through a variety of methods. We're asking participants if they would be part of the study for approximately 4 years. And what we want to do is compare their gut microbiome to a range of cognitive assessments and physical measurements to see if we can decipher any things from there that would indicate cognitive decline during that old age. And thank you very much.
Thank you. And Nancy, if I can bring you in now.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Nancy. I'm a second year PhD student at the Gladwin Institute. I am also in the Lindsay Hall lab. So Sarah is actually a colleague of mine, and I'm here to briefly talk to you about my PhD project, which is a non-interventional trial called the BEAM study. And this study is looking into the relationship between the gut microbiota and breast health, but also more specifically breast cancer. So first of all, the question would actually be, is there a link between the bacteria of our gut and breast cancer? And quite surprisingly, there actually is. So 2 years ago, a researcher actually looked at a huge population who all donated some poo samples over a long period of time. And he then decided to look at any of the changes in the microbiota with common diseases to see if there was anything important. And quite surprisingly, breast cancer popped up to be one of them. So this study actually suggested that breast cancer patients may have a different gut microbiota than those who do not have breast cancer. And this is essentially what the BEAM study is trying to look at further. But why am I looking at the gut microbiota in relation to cancer? In the past, research has shown that certain bacteria can actually cause diseases or health issues like gut cancer and obesity, and it isn't necessarily ideal. So knowing if a bacteria can actually increase your risk of developing a certain health issue or disease can actually allow doctors to diagnose you earlier or even intervene to decrease your risk. If you don't mind, just like, Andrew, if you don't mind, yeah. I forgot I had animation, so apologies for that. But on the other hand, in the last 2 years or so, researchers have actually said that some bacteria may actually be very good for you. So having these bacteria in gut microbiota may actually improve the outcome of certain therapies, which is obviously just amazing. Oops, sorry. Yeah, that's the next slide. So, well, why am I looking at the gut microbiota in breast cancer patients? It's something I'm interested in, and this is essentially what the BEAM study is. So I'm asking BEAM participants to donate poo samples, which is a bit weird because I already said I'm looking at breast cancer. But essentially, poo samples contain bacteria of your gut, and it's a very easy, but most importantly, a non-invasive way of collecting data. So BEAM participants would receive this poo collection kit shown on the left bottom part of the slide. And they basically get them posted to their homes at various stages across the year. Some of these patients may have been diagnosed with breast cancers. Others may be at risk of developing breast cancer, or perhaps not at all. Essentially, at home, they can collect their poo sample and send it back to me via the post, where I then delve deeper into researching their gut microbiota profile. For patients who are undergoing cancer treatments, these timely poo samples along their treatment pathway allows me to see how treatments or certain drugs can affect the gut microbiota. And hopefully, fingers crossed, should be able to see if there is actually a link between the gut microbiota and breast cancer. So that is pretty much the BEAM study in a nutshell. If you do have any questions, please fire them away in the chat. Apart from that, that's it for me. Thank you for listening, and I do hope you're enjoying your evening.
Thanks, Nancy, and I'll hand over to Rachel now.
Hello, thank you, Andrew. Yep, I'm Rachel. I'm the manager of the biorepository. I specialise in sample handling, and I've been an academic and a researcher myself, so I appreciate how important it is to get good research samples. So have you heard from Sarah and Nancy that during trials we often collect samples. These are obviously immediately used sometimes in experiments, but they need to be kept safe and secure, often at low temperatures, so they can be used for experiments later on. So a biorepository or tissue bank or a biobank can help with this storage. When we think of a tissue bank or a biobank, we often think of a large room full of freezers holding lots of different tissues. And to a degree, that is what we are and what we do. However, it's the biorepository's role to make sure that any samples that come to us do so are correctly logged and stored, they're collected ethically and lawfully, and that the people who have kindly donated these samples have done so given their fully informed consent. So researchers who wish to use human tissue samples in their work and their research need to follow these strict guidelines. They need to state how these will be handled, how they'll be stored and looked after and disposed of. When I talk about human tissue, I mean all sorts of different tissue, anything that comes from a human, as we've heard, fecal samples, swabs, things like that. When we collect data, tissue, we also collect data associated with samples. This data is collected securely within protected databases. We're often asked why we need to hold this data, such as maybe age or gender or medical history, but it needs to do so to enable the researcher, the clinician or the scientists to understand and explain or interpret their findings and what they mean and explain them. So here at the Biorepository in Norwich, we're made up of team members of a variety of different people, all specialising in tissue banking. We not only assist in the collection and storage of tissue and data, but we provide advice and guidance, including training. We're particularly interested in outreach programs such as these and involve bringing discussions on ethics and tissue and organ donation to the public. So please feel free to get in contact with us if you want to hear more about what we're doing, or indeed our up and coming new website that's going to be more information about donating samples and what we do. And you can see the emails there up on the screen. So we hold a number of different samples, urine, blood, fecal samples. A majority of these are kept in freezers, so you can see large freezers kept together, and these are specifically designed. We keep temperature control, so those pressure samples that are donated to us are kept at their absolute optimum. We normally keep them around -80, so about 4 times the coldness of your freezer at home. So there's a lot of governance around this, keeping your data safe and keeping your samples safe. So this is something that we specialise in, and we assist sort of the ethical issues around this and help researchers conduct that. It's really important for us to collect tissue in the process of lots of this research, and so we can basically allow for this and help people to explore these governance, and we can make sure that they're following the right rules and guidelines. So by taking these fresh samples, we can expand our knowledge and understanding about human health and disease. So it's really important that we are able to collect samples such as these. Our biorepository email is biorepository@nnuh.nhs.uk. Thanks for listening, and if you want to get in contact, please do, and I hope you enjoy your evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Right, over to Carl.
Well, good evening, everyone. So my name is Carl Philpott, and I'm what they call a clinical academic. So I spend half my week seeing patients and operating on patients through the NT service at the James Paget Hospital, and the other half of my week is overseeing research and teaching activity. So one of the big projects which I oversee is the macro program, and the macro program is a 7-year program of research funded by the National Institute of Health Research, which is the sort of research arm of the NHS. So this was a major project funded at the tune of £3.2 million, which tells you something about the cost of sort of running this type of research. And Andrew mentioned earlier about the timescale of getting research up and running, and I can attest to that with the macro program, because we started the beginnings of the macro program in about 2012. A couple of applications that went to funding panels that were rejected because they didn't think the disease topic was important enough. So the key bit of work we did then was to get patients involved and to make a case for why this was an important condition to fund research in. And then there's a 2-year cycle to getting the sort of funding application again through to fruition, which we've finally got funded in 2016. And of course, that was the beginning then of the 7-year program. And part of that is the trial. So we've got a big trial recruiting 600 patients with a condition called chronic rhinosinusitis, which is basically where the lining of your nose and sinuses gets swollen and in some cases forms polyps, or little grape-like swellings inside the nose. And for anyone who's experienced it, it's a pretty miserable condition because it feels like waking up every day with a cold. It's probably the best way to describe it in a nutshell. And so we see a lot of patients year in, year out who suffer with these symptoms, and some require medical treatment, but some require surgical treatment. And one of the key things that we didn't really know is what is the role of long-term antibiotics for these patients, and also what is the role of sinus surgery. And although sinus surgery is common practice around the world for this condition, actually there hadn't yet been a trial which established that surgery was any better than medical treatment alone. So we needed a trial that showed that. And this gave us an interesting conundrum, because what we've ended up with is basically a medical and surgical trial. So actually looking at medical treatment and surgical treatment in the same package. And that required a lot of sort of forethought before the trial could run, because we required an initial period of research which involved interviewing patients, interviewing doctors, interviewing GPs, as well as the specialists, about their views on how the condition was managed, and therefore how we would then feed that into designing an appropriate trial that would best address the research question. So if we can move on to the next slide. So you can see here what we ended up with is what we call a 3-arm trial, and this was interesting because we started out with a 2-arm trial in 2 stages, and the process that we went through to get to the end trial design was a heavily debated topic. And in fact, we had what we call a consensus meeting, where we had all the different types of research team around the table. So we had people like me who are clinicians, we had people from the trials unit, we had qualitative researchers who look at the interview process of collecting data from patients. We had patients themselves in the room. So we had a whole range of different experts inputting into the discussion, and the room was completely split down the middle as to which trial design we should do. And actually the way we resolved it was to come up with a hybrid design that brought the 2 together, and we went back to the patients and asked the patients what they thought was the best way forward, and actually that's how we ended up with this trial. So at the point of the lockdown, we'd recruited about 150 patients, and we say we've got a target of 600 patients to recruit across 17 sites around the UK. So involvement in the trial is a 6-month period with 3 visits in the trial. And then we actually ask patients to consent to be in contact with us for an additional 5 years beyond the end of the trial by electronic follow-up, so we can actually get symptom questionnaires back from them for a long period afterwards. And that's really critical for this particular condition because it's such a chronic condition, and actually getting information over 6 months doesn't really tell us the whole story. We want to know how people are doing much further down the line, because it's much further down the line when they often come back and require additional treatment. The other thing we're doing alongside this, in line with the last talk about the biorepository, is we're actually asking for patients in the trial to consent to donate tissue samples, because what we want to know is there a biological reason why some patients might do better with one treatment than another. And the hope is that in the future we'll actually be able to say to patients when we first meet them, on the basis of your biological profile, actually you may be best suited to medication, or you may be best suited to going straight to surgery, and we can actually give them more of a steer, rather than the approach at the moment where we throw the kitchen sink at people to sort of say, well, we'll give you everything and we'll see what works. So this will be hopefully allow us to have a much more refined approach to offering treatment to patients in the future, which is exciting actually, and hopefully something that will be a real transformation in the next decade. So hopefully you've if you have any sort of burning questions around direct clinical trials, I'm happy to sort of answer those in the chat as we go along, and hope you enjoy the rest of the talks.
Right. Thank you very much. I'll hand over now to Polly and Matt at the Clinical Trials Unit.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Mohammed. I'm Deputy Director of the Norwich Clinical Trials Unit. We are a nationally accredited specialist unit. So we're basically a special unit based at the university that conducts and runs clinical trials. And we're talking more about sort of multi-centre clinical trials here, so big ones that run all over the UK. At any time, we have sort of about 30 clinical trials running. We've got a whole variety of specialisms that we're interested in. They're listed on this slide. So we do a lot of stuff in cardiology and in respiratory. That I'll mention one of them in a bit. Diabetes as well, which has always been something that, with its prevalence in Norfolk, has always been something that there's been quite a lot of research into here. We're increasingly doing stuff in neurology and cancer. Smoking cessation, so stopping smoking trials, are a new one that are becoming more and more common. Likewise, things like chronic fatigue syndrome and ME, again, we're starting to do trials in that. We've always done quite a lot of dementia trials, et cetera, and I won't go through all of the ones actually on the slide. But we also, just to say, we do healthcare research as well, which means actually not treating patients, but looking how to improve the way that the NHS works by interventions to maybe make the patient's pathway through hospital better. So, as I say, we do loads of different stuff. What most people think of, I think, a lot of the time when they think about clinical trials, is they think about drug trials. That isn't just clinical trial. That's just one part of clinical trials. But we do those. So we do human drug trials, often not actually using new drugs, but finding a new use for an old drug that's already existing. So, for example, an antibiotic that's been around for donkey's years, finding actually that it's quite useful in a different disease, not being used as an antibiotic. And there's lots of research that goes into that in the UK. We do medical device trials as well. So testing new medical devices. Medical device is basically anything that you're using on patients in a medical setting to do a thing. So that can include things as pacemakers. We've got a really cool thing, an artificial pancreas trial that I'll talk about in a minute. But also diagnostic devices as well. We do some of those. Some of them are linked in actually with COVID now as well. And then the third sort of, well, not the third arm, but we also do things called complex interventions. And these are really common actual clinical trials that don't involve either a drug or a device. And what they are is it's a health intervention. It could be a stopping smoking one. It could be how to deal with people in hospitals better who've broken their hips, things like that, that aren't necessarily, like I say, a drug or a device, but there's something else. We do a hell of a lot of those in Norwich as well. And we also do psychological ones and other observational studies as well. Sorry, you can move on. So I'm going to talk about drug trials that we do. As I said, most drug trials that are done in, when I say done in Norwich, I mean as in we coordinate them, we set them up, we design them, we get the funding, and they're run all over the country. But they're also run in Norwich. So NNUH, the hospital, we always work with them on our trials. So any of the ones that we do recruit at the hospital locally as well, and we work very closely with them. We're very linked in with them. So as I say, most drug trials don't actually use a new drug. Those are sort of the phase 1 trials we're talking about. But even then, when new drugs are coming along, that's a small proportion of most of the drug trials that are going on. Like I say, most drug trials are using existing drugs and trying to get better use out of them somewhere else. So repurposing them basically. And we do quite a few of those. And this is one of the examples, one of the ones that we're doing at the moment. It's called the TIPAL trial, and it's looking at potential therapeutic agents for a pretty horrible disease called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. It's sort of a lung scarring disease. So people who have this have progressively worse lung function, so they find it harder to breathe. It's a progressive disease. There's no cure other than getting a lung transplant. There are treatments, they're very expensive, and they're not 100% effective, and it leads to 5,000 deaths every year. Now, we're working with researchers, and what we've as a group we sort of discovered is that when we look through, there is evidence in previous studies that have been done that patients who take anti-acid drugs may have a slower progression of the disease, and it's not going to cure it, but it will slow down the decline in their lung function. So as a result, we applied for money, and we've been granted money to run this trial. And what we're going to do is give, we've got 298 people that we're going to be recruiting. Half of them are going to get a drug called lansoprazole, which is a really common PPI inhibitor and antacid that's commonly given, very good sort of side effects, as in doesn't really have very many of them. Or they'll get a placebo, and they won't know which one they're getting. The doctor won't know which one they're getting. We don't actually know which one they're getting unless we have to know until the end of the study, to avoid any accusations of bias. And what we'll do is at the end of the trial, we're going to look at the patient's lung functions at the start of the trial and then at the end of the trial. And we're going to compare the two groups to see whether the lansoprazole slowed down the decline. As I say, this is starting, well, I didn't say actually, but it's starting in January. It's had a bit of a delayed start because of, I don't know if you heard in the news, there was this thing. So it's kind of delayed the start a little bit, but we've redesigned it, we've COVID-proofed it, and it's going to be starting in January, including at the NNUH as well, and about 40 other similar NHS trusts around the country. That's one of them. So the next slide, and I will probably shut up after this one, which I'll be relatively pleased to know, is I'm going to talk about medical devices. So we do these as well. So as I said, a medical device is anything that does a thing. It can be from a pacemaker, it could be a defibrillator, it can be a scalpel, it can be a new type of clamp that you put on a valve in the body. And it can even be an app on a phone if it's doing a medical purpose. And we work on quite a few of these trials, increasingly so. And the one I'd like to talk about is called the ADAP trial, which is a bit of a favourite of mine. So this is looking at basically acting as an artificial pancreas. So women who have diabetes tend to find it very difficult to control their glucose levels during pregnancy, partly because the fluctuation. It's hard to do anything, to be honest. I'm not myself being pregnant. You might have worked out, but I have been around someone when they were pregnant, and it's hard enough to remember to do anything. But imagine you have diabetes and you have to monitor that, and you have to very carefully manage that, because if your blood sugar goes too high, the baby will grow too big, and that will cause difficulties in birth. If you don't have enough blood sugar, the baby won't grow very well. So it's really important for the mother to be able to manage their glucose levels all the time. And women who can't do that don't have very good birth outcomes. So what we've done is we've worked with Cambridge University and developed an app. Well, it's their app, but we're the ones trialing it, which works with an existing glucose sensor. So these things are already on the market. You can wear a continuous glucose monitor, which is a little device that goes under your skin and in real time reads your glucose levels. And another thing as well that already exists on the market is a insulin pump. So you can wear that on your hip, and that you can dial it up and control it manually to put insulin into you to avoid having to inject yourself repeatedly during the day. What the app does is that it listens to the glucose monitor constantly and finds out the glucose levels, and it tells the insulin pump what to do. So that closed loop system is basically what the pancreas is meant to do in a healthy person. So the idea of that is that the patient's glucose never really fluctuates, and it stays stable all the way through, and they have a nice healthy baby again. So this is a collaboration, very close collaboration with the hospital. We're looking at 124 pregnant women with diabetes take part. I think we've got about 40 as of this week, and it's currently recruiting, I think, about 10 centres in the UK. It actually is an interesting one in that it has been entirely unaffected by COVID-19, because most of everything in this trial is done remotely and virtually via cloud systems and all that kind of thing. And so it's one of the few trials that hasn't been massively impacted by COVID-19.
Thank you. Right, we have saved the most important person to the last, I think. And that's Tony, who is a member of the public.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I've skipped one of your slides, Matt.
No, it's not me, it's Polly. But
Polly.
Just a semi-important person, but yeah. I won't take long. So yeah, Matt referred to the sort of third type of trial that we do, which is the complex interventions. So that covers interventions that aren't a drug or a medical device, sort of catch-all term. And they can be treatments used with patients, such as physiotherapy or psychological intervention, or it can refer to a service level intervention, so changing a process in a hospital or a GP practice, for example. So an example of one of those that we're running at the moment is the Prepare ABC trial. And this is looking at patients with colorectal cancer, which is a common cancer in the UK. And generally it's treated using surgery, with post-operative complications being quite common. And there's evidence that people who go into surgery that are fitter will have better outcomes and fewer complications afterwards. So the idea of Prepare is that it's a prehab program. So patients, it's a 3-arm trial. So patients are randomly allocated to a control group where they have a surgery date booked as usual and they get normal NHS treatment. Or they can be allocated to a hospital-based supervised exercise program before surgery. So they would actually go into the hospital periodically to be helped to exercise by the clinicians, or they will be allocated to a home-based exercise group. So they're given exercises to do and supported by telephone calls. So we're looking for about 1,200 patients, so it's quite a big trial across 20 NHS trusts, and we're about halfway on the recruitment for that. And we look at what happens after surgery, and we ask patients about their quality of life after surgery. Unfortunately, this one has been somewhat impacted by COVID-19. As you can imagine, hospitals are trying to limit unnecessary visits. So what we've done is just pause that hospital-based arm so that patients coming in now will be allocated to just the control group or the home-based intervention. Okay, I think that covers that one. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Tony. Right, sorry, Tony. The public, probably the most important group of people in all of this, because this is why we do this research, and we couldn't do it without people like Tony. So, Tony, over to you in terms of your perspective. Have we lost? I think you might be muted.
I think you'll probably hear me better now. My voice is coming through with it.
Yeah,
sorry about that. Yes.
Bingo.
Right, start again. Sorry. Yes, I'm Tony. I'm a member of the public, and as it happens, I'm something called a research champion for the Eastern region, and a member of a research ethics committee at the University of East Anglia. So what that means basically is I try to encourage people to take part in research, and I'm also involved as a member of the public when clinical trials are being approved and developed, so as to make sure that our point of view, the point of view of the public in general, are taken into account. And you could argue that, in fact, research couldn't happen without people being prepared to take part in clinical research. All of the advances that have taken place for many years, that have transformed the lives of people, that have tackled diseases and conditions, that have given hope to many patients and their friends and families, have happened because many people are prepared to take part in research, and they can make a real contribution to society and their community. And I've argued that, in a sense, of course, the great changes that have happened, that have made so much difference to people's lives, have been because of people who are heroes in terms of doing the research, in making the developments, in finding the answers. But also the heroes over the years have been the participants who have taken part. And I myself, like a lot of other people, are involved as a participant in research studies. Currently, I'm involved in some COVID-19 research studies, and also as a member of control groups, because it's not only people with conditions who are asked to take part in research and are helpful, very helpful if they take part in research, but also people who are healthy in other ways. And I'm involved in, as a member of a control group, in research on dementia and Parkinson's disease and in some other diseases. Now, we're very lucky, in fact, in the Norwich area, in having the Norwich Research Park with so many institutions that are involved in research. And I think we'll hear later that you can, in fact, if you go onto the UEA site, you can find there research studies, and this changes all the time, it's brought up to date all the time, research studies you can take part in. The same goes to the Podrum Institute and for other places as well. And more generally, there's a website called the Be Part of Research website, which is organized by the National Institute for Health Research. And what you can do with that is you can put in your age and where you live and the kind of things you're interested in, and that'll throw up then periodically things that you can take part in if you wish, and you can have a look at it and you'll be sent some details, and you may decide not to take part at that particular point, and then you'll be sent some other details as you would be by the UEA or by the Quantum Institute. And so at some particular point in the next year or so, you might find something you really enjoy doing and where you feel you can make a contribution. So as you can see, it's something I'm quite enthusiastic about, and it's very good to be involved, to be invited to be involved in this, because, as I say, I think the participants in all this are at least as important as these very important people doing the research who we're hearing from today. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. None of it could happen without you. Right. Okay, I think we've had a number of questions come in now, and I'm going to pick the first question I've got is from Samantha, who it's a topical question. It's asked, it's a bit top trumps, but it's what human clinical trial has been the quickest one to turn around? And I wondered, Matt, if you had any thoughts about that one.
Okay, so there's quite a well-known one at the moment, actually, which is a bit of an example. So the recovery trial that Oxford University, Oxford CTU, actually it's 2 CTUs involved with that in Oxford, are running. They claim to have set it up, well, so just for context, phase 3 clinical trials, which is this sort of a phase 3 clinical trial, it's got some elements of phase 2 as well, but it's mainly phase 3 clinical trial. Tend to take, to get the funding, it would usually take sort of a year at least. Then you would have 6 months of setup. Then you would need to open all your sites, which would take a long time. You'd have to build all your databases. You'd have to make the drug, all of this kind of thing. You'd be talking years, basically, to set up a phase 3 clinical trial. They did it in 9 days, which is quite impressive, to be honest. They had a lot of help, to be honest. Pretty much every possible hurdle that we're fight against as researchers was just discreetly moved out of the way for them, and they still had to obviously meet all the criteria to you know, and all the safety and regulations and things like that. But yeah, 9 days the recovery trial is pretty phenomenal. Yeah, from conception to opening. It's just yeah. I think that's the winner. I don't know if anyone's got any.
I haven't got any obvious contenders. No, I haven't. Another question we've had in from Graham, I think, is talking about risks to participants, really. But how are risks and patient safety managed in terms of clinical trials? I don't know if anybody feels they want to sort of tackle that element of clinical trials.
Yeah, happy to address that. So
I suppose,
yeah, I mean, as a researcher, you sort of when you come up with a research idea, often I'll you know, talk to people like Matt, who actually happens to live in the office next door to me, so it's very convenient. I can knock on his door and ask him. But yeah, so we have a conversation about a trial design. How does this work? You know, how is it going to sort of run in reality? You know, as I mentioned before, one of the things you often do now is get sort of public involvement and get them thinking about, you know, how does this work. But in terms of the kind of, you know, the safety aspects, obviously any application, once it's funded, then has to go through a research application process through the a Research Ethics Committee, and also through the Health Regulation Authority, HRA, which is the other sort of part of the equation. And they basically will look at all the safety aspects of a trial, how you're going to sort of deliver it, how you're going to recruit patients, how you're going to store information about the patients, how you're going to store any samples about the patients, what are the risks to the patients, what are the risks to the researchers, are there any cost implications of doing so. So all those aspects will all be part of the application form. So we have an application system called the IRAS, which is an online system where everything is entered that you need to sort of know about the research. That then gets sent on to the Research Ethics Committee and to the HRA, and then they'll come back and they will often sort of have a number of questions that they want you to clarify, and then you'll go back and sort of, you know, amend any of the paperwork and get the necessary approvals. For any interventional trials, then they usually have to also apply through the MHRA, which is the Medicine and Health Regulation Authority, and they will obviously also have a view on the drug you're using or the device you're using or the surgery that you're planning to do, and any safety aspects around that. And then there's an add-on component of the application that you do with that. And obviously, once the trial's running, then it's the job of the clinical trials unit to sort of have what we call a data monitoring committee. So they'll look at the any of the safety aspects of the trial, so any side effects from drugs. What we look out for things like adverse reactions, and we're particularly bothered about anything that's unexpected or that's severe, that causes an unexpected adverse reaction. So all those things have to be reported carefully on and monitored by the monitoring committee, and also the trial management group. And all those people will have sort of meet at regular intervals to kind of look at any aspects within the trial that are causing any kind of concern that need to be flagged up, and if anything needs to be changed. And obviously, if there is any kind of major concern about safety aspect of the trial, then the trial can potentially be stopped at any point if there is a concern. So I guess those are kind of the key regulatory checks in the process of setting up and running a trial.
Great, thank you. One other question we've had in is, it's a good question. Are recruits paid, and what's the time commitment? And I suspect the answer to that depends, really. It depends on the trial. I've certainly been involved in a trial in the past where I've been compensated for my time and expenses. I haven't been paid, but I have been given a sum of money because I gave up, I don't know, 2 or 3 mornings to take part in an intervention trial. But the COVID vaccine trial I'm part of currently, that's altruistic. I'm doing that because I want to do it. I'm not getting paid in any way for that. So the answer is it kind of varies. Time commitments, again, will vary according to the trial and what the trial is looking at. So if I think about the COVID vaccine trial at the moment, I spent 3 hours in the clinical research facility at the beginning of this month. I had a medical assessment, lots of observations taken, bloods taken, medical history taken, was accepted onto the trial, and then had an injection. And then in 3 weeks' time, well, actually less than 3 weeks' time now, next week, I'll go back for the second one. And that's pretty much it, apart from follow-up. So it can be variable, but Tony and anybody else who wants to comment on that, I think.
Just to say that the ones that I happen to be involved in haven't involved any kind of payment, and the people I've talked to mostly around the region mostly have taken part in, well, all of them I think so far have taken part in studies that don't get paid. I think actually, and people here today will know far more about it than I do. In some countries, I think there's a tradition that people do take part because they get paid. Whereas I think in the United Kingdom, for example, tremendous number of people take part without getting paid because they want to make a contribution. I think that's the value that people find in it, as much as whether there's any kind of financial benefit from it. But that's just my experience.
So often the trials that you hear about that pay large amounts of money are the phase 1 first in human trials, where they're doing it on healthy volunteers and they're testing a new drug, and those are usually pharmaceutical companies that are doing that, and so they're really having to basically compensate you for your time, because you're going to be stuck in a facility for a period of time, because they're going to be measuring stuff all the time. But in terms of the UK sort of academic clinical trial situation, it is really, as Carl and Tony alluded to, it is more that you're compensated for things like travel expenses. You might get a voucher, because we have to be careful, because there's a very, very clear risk to benefit ratio that we have to ask people to consider before they take part in a clinical trial. That every clinical trial, no matter how good the drug is, all that kind of thing, will carry a risk, and the benefit to the person has to be better, or at least equal to the risk that they're taking. And as soon as you start throwing money into there, it can get a little bit exploitative. So we do not pay people to take part in these trials, because they need to make the decision without money being involved, if you know what I mean. It's just a lot more ethical.
Yeah, I suppose it's analogous. Yeah, and it's analogous with giving blood in this country, where that's entirely altruistic, whereas in other countries it might not be. Great, thank
just
you.
On sorry, just to say on the subject of sort of follow-up, it's not unusual for people to be followed up for, say, 6 months to a year after they've been part of the trial intervention. And one of the things that we struggle with as researchers is encouraging people to keep completing questionnaires over and over again. Sometimes it must feel like. And we do some work in the clinical trials unit to work out what's the best way of contacting people, that fits in with their lives, and is that via email, telephone, or face-to-face visits, that kind of thing. We try to be quite flexible about that, depending on the population and who's involved.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Sarah, I've got a question which I think comes from the Parallel study for you from Winnie. So she's asked, how is dietary intake of the mother during pregnancy and lactation included as an influential factor? What relationship is hypothesized? I think what Winnie's asking is what's the hypothesis, I guess.
Thank you. So the pill study is quite unique in that it has quite a comprehensive data collection. So as well as sort of taking clinical samples from mum and baby, we are asking participants to complete a lot of lifestyle questionnaires, including dietary sort of elements, as well as looking at clinical notes, etc. We unfortunately currently don't have hypotheses for what we will find, but it's the most comprehensive study of its type that we're aware of. Right. So hopefully from that we will be able to then draw those links. We're currently still recruiting. We are on 72 participants so far, out of a total of what we would like to be 250. Once we have sort of more samples that have come in and more data collection, then we'll be able to start making those links. But unfortunately, I can't answer that question at the moment. Yeah. If you want to keep up to date on that, there is the whole lab website, which will regularly be having our publications up on.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sarah. Tony, we've got a question that's coming from Mike for you, and that is, do you get the sense there are some trials that the public are more easily convinced to get involved with? And is that to do with risk or convenience? I don't know whether you feel you can answer that one.
Sorry, I put my microphone on again. Sorry about that. Of course, a lot of people get involved because they've got a particular condition, or they've got a friend or a relation who's got a particular condition. So they're happy to get involved because they can see that's a benefit to them or their family or friends. I think also, quite importantly, it's the experience of other people who've taken part in research, because I mean there are a tremendous number of networks around in Norfolk and other places, and people do talk to each other. And so if we look after our research participants who are in our current research studies and get feedback from them as to how they think the research study is going and what their experiences are, then I think we can design the way we send out participant information sheets and things like that so as to encourage other people to take part in research. And of course, one of the factors we know why people don't take part in research is because they're worried, quite understandably, about will it be painful, will it be uncomfortable, and all of those kinds of things. That's quite understandable. And that's, again, I think, a good reason why sending out good, clear information to people so that people are giving informed consent is very important. But of course, very strikingly, it's very interesting indeed. There are thousands and thousands of people taking part in research around the country, and it's great credit to them that they do it basically from altruism rather than from any other reason, I think.
Yeah, great.
Can I just say as well, it's not just to take part in research, you don't have to be a trial participant. Yep. There's many ways to take part in research, and Tony's a perfect example of this. In terms of what a lot of what we try to do, and a lot of the requirements that we have to do this for funding is something called public and patient involvement, PPI, and engagement. And I'm going to be a bit mean now and ask Polly to talk about it, because she knows a lot more about it than me. But there's so many other ways to get involved in research that don't involve just being a participant on a clinical trial. Polly, I'm going to be horrible. Could you talk about PPI&E? Sorry, you know more than me.
I know we've only got a couple of minutes, so I'll be very quick. So basically, PPI is involving members of the public, those patient stakeholders, in the design of research, the running of the research, and how we disseminate the results. And that can really improve the quality and the meaningfulness of research to the general public.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we are getting close towards the end now. I'm going to get one more question. Carl, I think I might throw it your way, I'm afraid. It's a question about what's the biggest asset for clinical researchers? What do you think the biggest asset is?
I'd say definitely the biggest asset for the research I've done has been a good research nurse and building the rapport with the patients. And, I think one of the things we get often feedback from trial participants is actually they feel they like that sort of sense of additional care and attention that they get as being part of the trial, because our research nurse gives them a call before they enter the trial, asks them if they've digested the information, have got any questions. They then come to the research clinic and they can ask more questions there. But they're always in contact with our research nurse, and she's like sort of their anchor point through the trial. And it's been invaluable to me in terms of the success we've had with getting people into trials and keeping them engaged with the trial all the way through.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I suppose sort of as an adjunct to that, really, as an NHS consultant, do you think people understand the role the NHS plays in kind of supporting research? Do you think people know about that?
I think it's often a bit of an anathema, really, until people hear about something. And I think, as Tony said, I think those sort of, personal contacts, networks and conversations that have, and so spreading that message from people who have been involved is often invaluable, really. And if people have a positive experience of being involved with research, that can go a long way to disseminating the message that, it's such a valuable thing to come and to get engaged in whatever way it may be, from the PPI aspect to actually being a research participant.
Great, thank you. I'm going to squeeze one last question in, which was from Eva. It's, will there be a vaccine for COVID, and when will it be ready for public use? So that's a slightly big question. I think the answer is there will be vaccines for COVID, and they'll probably be first half of next year would be my best guess, but I don't know if anybody else wants to throw in anything to the mix.
Yeah, I guess it'll depend on the. I mean, we obviously, as you pointed out already, as a volunteer, we've got sort of COVID vaccine trials underway locally, and it's really just a case of sort of how long those take to sort of go through and give the results. And there were obviously various sort of centres around the world that are sort of running in parallel. So I guess it'll be sort of how quickly can we translate those into sort of clinical practice and start distributing that, which is the massive upscale that's going to be required.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Great. Okay. I think we're sort of now at the end, and I just want to say a big thank you to all of our panelists and to the team behind the scenes, Becky, Antonietta, Rachel, Natalie. And lastly, thank you very much to our audience.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, thank you everybody, especially to the panel and Becky Thompson for pulling this event together and doing all the organising behind the scenes. Please do stick around. We've got one more question for you on Menti to help us assess the impact of this event. But first, I must ask, please tell us what you thought by completing our survey using the link on the screen. You can also find the survey link on the Norwich Science Festival website. To help secure the future of Norwich Science Festival, please consider making a donation by visiting norwichsciencefestival.co.uk/donate. Please do join us for more Norwich Science Festival at Home events. All the details are on the Norwich Science Festival website and Facebook event listings. At 7 p.m. tomorrow, we'll have our last panel discussion of the Norwich Science Festival at Home programme, discussing Norwich Research Park's response to COVID-19. We hope you'll join us. So we'll just leave this slide up on the screen with the link to the impact survey on Menti. If you could just pop the number in, then you'll be able to answer one final question, which will help us to assess the impact of this event. So thanks again to our panel and thank you for watching. Good night.